Charlie and I just joined the compound in San Diego. So, of course, walk in the door and first thing I see is world's most jacked dude ever, which, of course, is Bryan Boorstein. So Bryan is here for the next month in San Diego, coming back to his roots, which we are super stoked about. So today we were going to nerd out over some cardio and conditioning talk, kind of chattering about zone 2 cardio, zone 5 cardio, and kind of everything in between. So Bryan, give us a little update. How excited are you to be back in the SD?
Oh man, I love it. It's been amazing. So we drove out here. We took the southern route this year, and usually we take the northern route. But the southern route takes us through Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then Scottsdale/Phoenix area, and then to San Diego from there. And it was cool. It was some topography I'd never seen before. I was really surprised at how high the elevation is for like 90% of that drive. From Santa Fe to Scottsdale, we were literally at 7,000 feet for 6 straight hours, but you couldn't even tell. It was like you're on a plateau, but you're super high up on a plateau. And then like the 30 minutes before we got to Scottsdale, we just descended down and it went from 26 degrees and snowing to 65 and sunny with palm trees. And we're like, oh, that's a huge change. Yeah.
Question for you. How old are each of your kiddos? And then how do you keep them occupied in the car? Because even for me, it's like road trips. It's like, ooh, I hope we got Wi-Fi or like something to, it's like I'm hot spotting the whole time and trying to stay busy. But like, how does that work with your kids? Because especially Bryson is like, loves being active. He's very just like, go, go, go. So like, how do you and Kim handle that in the car also?
That's a good question. So this time we got really lucky because both kids were like, on the verge of being sick before the trip. And so they both napped a lot. And Kim and I, of course, are joking, being like, man, we need to get them sick before every road trip. But they honestly just love the car. And we feel very blessed for that reason. They look out the window, they look at stuff, they're excited about what they're seeing and like just new sights in general. Bryson has a ton of worksheets from school. He's 5.5 now. So he's learning to spell and do like some very low level math and stuff like that. And so he spent a number of hours just doing worksheets. You could see him in the back counting math out on his fingers. Like one of his things was 8 + 5. And so he hands it to Kim and it says 12. And she goes, "Oh, great job!" And I'm like, "Hey, baby, that's not right. It's not 12." And she goes,
"Hey, not all of us are good at math."
But he does that, and then when they start acting up, which is inevitable at some point, we break out the iPads, and we have stuff downloaded on there, so we don't need Wi-Fi. And overall, we kept it to about an hour or two of iPad each 6-hour leg. So they had like 4 or 5 hours each leg where they were just kind of hanging out and chilling or napping or whatever. So we're overall just really happy to be out here. The first 2 days, as you know, being that you live here, have been absolutely gorgeous and got outside. We're right on the bay, went for bike rides, walks, stuff like that. These next 4 days are not so great, like 53 and rainy. But I just bought Bryson a brand new bike. So he has a 20-inch bike with 7-speed, which is kind of crazy. You see a 5-year-old kid rocking around with like this massive bike. It looks huge on him, and he's shifting gears and stuff, which is just nuts. But it's one of our favorite activities.
Me and Lori don't know what you're talking about because we don't ride a bike.
I was literally about to be like, "Wait, Alex, have you ridden a bike yet?" Because I still haven't ridden a bike. So, for those that don't know, I don't know why I've never ridden a bicycle other than I remember I like had training wheels. I fell really hard and ate shit. And having 2 older brothers, they like made fun of me with all their friends. And so, I don't know, I just like went to rollerblades and I never
we have literally we have the same story about this. So that's our same origination story about why we can't ride bikes. The same thing happened to me.
But you guys can both stationary bike like a boss.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny in the context that it's like we're athletic in pretty much any other arena of life except like doing something basic. And to be honest, it's like I've tried. I remember in 2020 or 2021, I actually flew out to hang out with Ryan Fisher, and he was like, "Oh, like let's rent bicycles and like go for a beach stroll." And I was like, "Okay, we're going to do it. And like, it was an hour of like, I literally couldn't figure it out. And I just kept like, falling over and stuff. So we're still here. 2023, still haven't ridden a bicycle successfully. Well, Mac Daddy, what's aside from enjoying beautiful 80-something degree weather, as we saw in the forecast this morning, what are you up to?
I'm just getting ready for my trip to Egypt. I mean, I'm heading to Egypt in a month, so I'm bummed you to not be able to come with us. But just I'm really looking forward to that trip, and I'm wrapping up a cut. So yeah, we'll be nice and shreddy up in Egypt. Taking my shirt off in the pyramids,
What's your body weight at?
Yeah, I was gonna say, give us a little update on that.
174. I was around 180. And I started a cut in January, like January 1. Very, very basic bitch cut. But it's going well. I was in San Diego for 2 weeks and kind of just took a little diet break there, and then just hop back on it. So
I have a question about this in relation to your jiu-jitsu. So I know jiu-jitsu is a balance of speed and power. So how do you find weight loss affects your jiu-jitsu?
That's a good question. Actually, I haven't really noticed any difference because even though you do need speed and power, it's a lot of technique and leverage. So now that I'm more knowledgeable in jiu-jitsu, I can still use my weight and my leverage to create pressure without being heavier, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I feel like y'all have such like happy updates, and then I'm over here like, hey, we're still alive. So like,
the Cheeto trying to kill you.
So my friend,
that thing Flaming Hot or something.
I need to send you a video, and I might actually we can put it on this clip. My friend Chelsea sent me a video while I was actually still in the hospital. So I'll back it up. For those not in the loop, basically on New Year's, I ended up in the ER, found out I had a blood clot. We went in and removed the blood clot on February 1st. And then my body loves me so much that we got a second blood clot and had that removed the day after Valentine's Day. So that was literally my body being like, here's your gift for Valentine's Day, killer Cheeto number 2. So Chelsea sent me this video, how on TikTok or on social media, you can put your eyeballs on an object. She drove to the grocery store, got a bag of Flaming Hot Cheetos, and then basically sang a song that was like, hi, I'm so glad you're feeling better, all this stuff. But literally, I actually didn't see it the day I was in the hospital, obviously, because I was out that whole day. And I woke up to that and literally laughed so hard I cried. It is so good. So I might even put that in my Instagram feed.
We gotta put that on the Instagram.
That shit was so funny. But right now we're on the mend. I will basically have surgery right now that's scheduled for April. We'll see if we end up being able to push it out that long. But basically, I've kind of been posting a ton about this. Have thoracic outlet syndrome, and I don't want to get into it on this podcast because we got a lot of fun stuff. So just give a little update and say I'm doing really well. I will even pan a little bit of my camera, but we finally have furniture. When Alex came to visit, we didn't have a couch. We were basically sitting on the floor with lawn chairs, or
on
sitting
unicorn.
I was gonna say the inflatable unicorn. So we have furniture. We're almost official over here. So life is feeling less like a dumpster fire, and we are very grateful for that. But let's get into some cardio goodness. I wanted to do a little start with this and just kind of briefly chat about each of our own personal histories or background of what cardio or what fun, has anybody run races, any sort of thing like that. So let's start with Bryan. What you got?
Yeah, well, cardio has always been the thing that I suck at from a long, long time ago. Even when basketball in high school, it was my sport, but I always struggled because I couldn't play defense super well because I would just get tired. I would save my energy for offense. And I didn't realize until later that it was kind of like a V02 Max cardiovascular output type issue. I realized it about 15 years later when I got into CrossFit and I started taking the OPEX certification stuff, and they did a V02 Max test on me. And this was in the height of my CrossFit competition days. And my VO2 max was like 43 and a half, which for like a 28-year-old person who's competing in a cardiovascular-ish type sport, that's extremely low. And I remember James Fitzgerald, who was the owner of OPEX at the time, he looked at me and he goes, no wonder you hate circuit training.
But your abs were probably still so good, ironically, right? Like, because you were you've always been like super shreddy. So
yeah, but I always sucked at anything that was like longer than 8 minutes, monostructural type cardio, any of those 20-minute AMRAPs that were in the open, 5, 10, 15 of different things. And so it was at that point where I realized that cardio was a problem for me, and it really didn't seem to improve no matter what I did. And so when I left CrossFit in 2016, 17, I basically just was like, hey, I don't need cardio anymore. Like, good riddance. Get it out of my life.
Cardio.
I always understood the importance of step counts, and that's been something that's been a staple of our Paragon programs since inception. Really, is hey, let's try to get 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day minimum, or whatever it is. Let's just make sure we're moving in some capacity. And so, even now, I still think that the low level buy-in to just longevity and health you can get like the majority of that just from doing step counts and lifting weights. But it's kind of just cardio. The idea of these different zones that we're going to talk about today have piqued my interest over the last year. And it started with me beginning to nasal breathe when I would walk. And at first that was just hard for me to even consciously nasal breathe while walking. Over a month or two, that became no big deal. Now it's like subconscious. I can just breathe through my nose, walk, no big deal. I started then mouth taping at night to make sure I was breathing through my nose to increase, oxygen supply and stuff like that. And then now I mouth tape and I do cardio. So I'll legit do my zone 2 work and I'll tape my mouth and I'll nasal breathe through that.
What do you mean by taping your mouth?
3M micropore tape. You can check it out on Amazon, but it's basically like a very benign tape that you just put over your mouth. And then if you had to, you could just kind of pop your lips and the tape would just come off. But it's more of like a tactile reminder to be like, hey, let's breathe through our nose.
Okay.
So I do that at night. I do that sometimes for cardio, not every time. And over the course of the last 6 months, my VO2 max, according to my Apple Watch, which, we don't know how accurate that is, but it was in the 39s before I started doing all this stuff. And now I'm into the 43s, which is kind of a significant improvement. And it's equal to where I was at 27 years old when I was competing in CrossFit.
And you did this just by nasal breathing, or was it a combination of nasal breathing plus
I'm sure it's
mouth?
Both. Yeah,
both.
I'm sure.
Okay. Maybe we'll get into this, but I'm just curious, like, what does the nasal breathing help you do in terms of increasing your VO2 max?
Yeah. So when you breathe through your mouth, you're actually ingesting a bunch more carbon dioxide, and the little hairs in your nose, they filter the carbon dioxide so that you get more pure oxygen, I guess would be the simple way of saying that. Usable oxygen that your body can then, transfer through the blood to your cells and your mitochondria and all these things and become more efficient. So people that are
mouth breathers
are just generally poor at cardio in general. So
you're speaking to me, Bryan. Okay. I'm a fucking mouth breather for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a mouth breather my whole life, like since as long as I can remember I was. And so switching to the mouth taping at night and then doing my cardio, nasal breathing and stuff like that has been what I think a huge asset and increased the quality of my sleep for sure. I mean, using the smart devices that I have, the quality of my sleep has skyrocketed over the last 6 months since I started doing this. And that's had trickle down effects into the energy that I have throughout the day, the mental clarity and the focus and things like that. And so now I'm 40 years old, and there are 2 correlates to longevity. VO2 max, if you're in the top 2.5% of VO2 max, you are 5 times less likely to die than somebody in the bottom 25% of VO2 max. And if you're in the top 2.5% of muscle mass, you're 3 times less likely to die than the people in the bottom 25% of muscle mass. And so VO2 max and muscle mass are the two highest correlated variables with longevity and decreasing mortality risk. And I'm obviously at no risk of having not enough muscle. So I figured that my time would be more effectively spent trying to curate better cardiovascular conditioning. And we can get into all of the kind of cellular functions of that and all that over time. But
That's super interesting.
That's more or less my story as far as cardio in my life.
Well, and I think also it's probably a reflection naturally too that like your kids are getting older. Like, when you're in survival mode and your kids are young, it's like you're not really worried about like all the things you can do with them yet. But it's like your kids are starting to be at that fun age where you're like, yo, like Bryson's doing ski lessons and all that stuff too. So it's like, it's one of those things that actually is really important if you're a parent is, can you keep up with your kids and can you keep up with, them running around and all that stuff. So it's like, I'm sure that's kind of, part of it too. I was curious, and again, we don't have to go super deep, but it's like, especially when it comes to lifting or it just comes to day-to-day life, we know that a lot of people actually tend to breathe through their chest rather than, through their abdomen. So I was curious if the nasal breathing versus like the mouth breathing thing, doesn't that kind of go like hand in hand with that too?
Yeah, it helps you become just more efficient at breathing and getting oxygen to the right places.
Alex, Mr. King of Track Tuesdays. I know those haven't been a thing for a while, but did you do a lot of cardio? Because you didn't play a ton of sports growing up, right? It wasn't until kind of later.
No, I didn't play any sports growing up for sure. But I did run track and did cross country in high school, which I was also terrible at. Cardio is cardio for me, man, for sure. I am not a cardio person. I was okay at the lower distances. Like I ran 400 to 800, and I was awful at anything above 800. So I did cross country, and I was terrible at it. So yeah, I'm just not built like that. And even with jiu-jitsu, we do things like where you may be in what is called a scramble, where you're really having to move really quickly, and it's a lot of cardio for like burst energy type stuff. And yeah, I mean, I'll be all right for maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, but past that, it goes downhill real quick. So yeah, cardio. I'm really not that great at, but I did run a half marathon in 2020 because there was nothing else to do. So that was the longest distance I've ever ran continuously, which was really cool because I didn't really think I could do that. But I trained for that for about 6 months and did a mixture of long runs, medium distance runs, and then also track workouts, which is where you're talking about the Track Tuesday, which I would do speed work at the track, and I really just did it on my own. Just kind of followed a generalized program like from the Nike Run Club app, but mostly just program some of those speed workouts on my own. Ran the half marathon. I did it, I think, in like 2 hours and 11 minutes, I was happy with that for never having to run that kind of distance before. So, but I haven't really done any kind of like long distance cardio type stuff like since then. I just mostly do all my cardio is through jiu-jitsu. So I'll roll for, if we do a class and then we have mats, we do open rolls. I'll usually roll like anywhere from 6 to 8 times, and we do 6 to 8 minute rounds. You were mentioning that you got a bike and you were doing like zone 2 training. I think that's what we wanted to talk about like mostly during this podcast. So can you tell us more about like what these zones mean like in terms of cardio training and how we're going to use them in Paragon?
There's 2 kind of zone systems. The most common one is zones 1 through 5. And so that's the one we're going to talk about on here. But if you just Google the training zones, it's actually weird because the first thing that's going to come up is a bunch of cycling literature, and they use 6 zones, which can be very confusing because when you say zone 2 and you're on a 6 zone system, zone 2 is actually kind of more like zone 1.5 on the 5 zone system. So just to keep that in mind in case you kind of go down that Google rabbit hole, dear listener, and you're confused kind of why it may not match up what we're saying. We do use the 5 zone system. So zone 1 would essentially be activities of daily life. Gardening, doing the laundry, walking around your house, going for a structured walk, something along those lines. And that would be like your lowest heart rate level output, up to kind of where zone 2 begins. And so zone 2 is a bit of a range. And there's a number of both more objective and subjective ways that you can kind of go about assessing how to ensure that you're in zone 2. So I'll get into that in a minute. But zone 3 is then going to be above zone 2. It's generally going to start to become unsustainable at zone 3, but you may not feel that immediately. It's one of those things where you might be going for 30, 40 minutes and feel like it's sustainable. But if you were to try to do that for an hour or an hour and a half, you would quickly realize that your pace begins to suffer a little bit. And then zone 4 is obviously above that. And zone 5, being the top zone, is going to be about 90% of your maximum heart rate and above. And so that's the kind of stuff that you would get into when you start sprinting or getting to the point where you literally can't keep going anymore. You like have to stop because you can't breathe anymore. A very crude metric of establishing your maximum heart rate is 220 minus your age. And I actually think that that's usually pretty accurate within 5 or 10 beats per minute for most people. So for me at 40, 220 minus my age is 180. And then similarly, they have a very crude metric to establish your zone 2, and that is generally 180 minus your age. So for me at 40 years old, 180 minus my age puts me at 140. And then from there, you'll generally want to discount that number 5 to 10 beats per minute if you're in poor cardiovascular shape. And you would want to increase that number 5 to 10 beats per minute if you're a phenom and in great cardiovascular shape.
How do you know? How do you know if you're in great cardiovascular shape or not?
Yeah. So most
how much wind you suck in?
Yeah, I know, because I suck pretty bad. I was like, I don't know, man.
So the first thing I'd say is that you probably know. But you probably, like the way that you described, you're like, yeah, I just don't like cardio. I'm not very good at it. Like anything over 800 meters is too far. Like you probably suck at cardio. So you probably need to discount that number 5 to 10 beats per minute. When I first started this, I was in that category of discounting it 5 to 10 beats per minute. So I took my 180 minus my age, put me at 140. And then I figured I'd be somewhere between 130 and 135 for my zone 2 work. Since then, over the course of months, cardio adaptations happen really fast, which is one of the things that makes it kind of fun to actually do cardio, because it's kind of like getting newbie gains all over again. And so now I'm up to the point where I'm like hovering around 140 beats per minute for my zone 2. And all of this is obviously subjective, because the real way that you tell if you're in zone 2 is the amount of lactate that your body produces. And so unless you're somebody that has really gone above and beyond and bought a lactate meter off Amazon, and just to throw it out there are maybe 30 people following Bryan's program in our app, and at least 2 of them have reported to me that they've gone out and bought lactate meters because they're super curious about what the lactate they're producing. So
where can you buy one?
On Amazon. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But, yeah. I mean, you measure, is it like a blood measurement or what is it?
Yeah.
Like,
so essentially the limitation to lactate testing is that it has to be done either mid-session. So you would have to be like in the middle of working out and prick your finger and then test the lactate.
So you already asking me to prick my finger and cause pain, and I'm already in more pain?
Right, exactly. It'll be a distraction.
Oh, man.
So then the other way you can do it is you have to prick your finger within 30 seconds of finishing your workout, because your lactate will start dissipating within 30 seconds to a minute. But that's even more complicated, or it is just complicated in general, because you have to make sure that your skin is really, really clean when you prick it. So you have to use hot soap and water and then prick your finger all within 30 seconds of finishing your workout. So the application of using a lactate meter is obviously up here. And what we're trying to do is establish a more reasonable way for general population to assess whether they're in zone 2. And so I think that crude metric of 180 minus age, and then either discounting or adding beats per minute based on your cardiovascular fitness, is a good starting point. Another really good one is to say a conversation that you're having that is semi-stressed. And that also can be a little ambiguous, because like Laura, who's part of our company, has described to me that she goes hiking and she's had conversations while her heart rate is in zone 4. So she's in conversation mode, but it's not a semi-stressed conversation. I think at that point you call that a stress conversation. So a semi-stressed conversation would be one that you can have and you can enunciate every word and there's no words lost or anything like that, but that the person on the other end of this call that you're having would be like, hey, are you exercising? Like, they're not like, sure. They're like, maybe you're exercising, but like you probably are, right? So those are kind of some basic crude ways of assessing zone 2.
So I've been laughing this whole time. And I mean, like, this isn't surprising probably for Alex knowing Charlie, but it's like we could be booking it on the trail and homie's still trying to talk. And you're just like he's that person that you're just like, dude, I just want to be headphones in and like do my jam. And like Charlie will be like trying to talk and you're like, bruh, like, so he's definitely on that same page as Laura where it's like loves chattering regardless of zone 2, 3, 4.
So, but you could use like a heart rate monitor, so like something like a chest monitor or wrist monitor, like a watch.
Yeah, exactly. So I pretty much just use my Apple Watch, and then that's generally the way that I go about that. But yeah, zone 2 is really the one that it has the most correlation to metabolic health. And so I don't know, there's kind of like the word mitochondria. I don't know how familiar our listeners are going to be with mitochondria and its function.
Taking it back to cell biology, man.
Yeah. Well, so essentially what zone 2 does when you stay in zone 2 for 45 to 60 minutes at a time is it increases the flexibility, the function, and just the general ability of the mitochondria to convert either glucose or fat into ATP. So it basically increases the ability of your body to be metabolically flexible, which is like the holy grail of fitness, but also the holy grail of longevity and health. Because what are the things that tend to get most of us as we get older? It's like diabetes, it's insulin resistance, it's metabolic health, it's lipid control. It's all of these inner workings that kind of all play into this milieu of like atherosclerosis and metabolic disease and stuff like that. And so zone 2 really helps us just become more metabolically adaptive, which allows us to eat foods that aren't going to spike our insulin super high, send our glucose out of control, and also just be better at utilizing energy within the function of our body on a day-to-day basis.
So basically, like a quick recap of that would just kind of be like zone 2 cardio is almost kind of the basis. Like if you want to think of it like this giant tree branch in your life, it's like it is this base and it's this thing you need for everything else in life. So it's like if you're doing regular zone 2 cardio work, you are gonna have, like that's going to improve your cardiovascular and your heart health. It's going to, lower your resting heart rate as you continue to do this over time. Which is a positive thing. It's like we're going to see better insulin sensitivity. We're going to be able to basically just manage, the carbohydrates and fats that we're eating a little bit better and be able to kind of like, I don't want to get super into it, but being metabolically flexible just means your body is efficient at burning both carbs or fats as fuel. So all of those things, again, it's like they're not incredibly sexy per se, but they are incredibly important. And kind of like Bryan was hinting at, it's like as we get older and older, like we don't give a fuck about a lot of that stuff necessarily when we are, a teenager in our 20s or maybe even, early 30s. But it's like as we get older and we're dealing with things like, starting to have, high cholesterol levels, or we're dealing with, potentially like type 2 diabetes and stuff. It's stuff that, again, it's like we want it as a basis. So if you actually look at guidelines for health, and if you're looking at different governing bodies like the American Heart Association, the CDC, they're basically recommending, hey, we would love to see something like 150 minutes per week of moderate aerobic exercise. This could also be, 75 minutes per week if it's a little more intense. Or obviously, we hope a little combination of both. And so even when we're looking at, it's like people are always asking like, oh, well, what's the best exercise program? It's like, if you were ever going to give a really generic prescription, it would be like, hey, can you lift heavy weights 2 to 3 or, 3 to 4 times a week? And then can you also get sweaty, get out of breath, 1 or 2 times a week? Again, it depends so much of like how much are you trying to exercise and stuff like that. But it's like, we don't necessarily just want to live on an island. It's like we want the benefits of strength training, but then mutually, the benefits of cardiovascular work and stuff like that. It's like we really want both of these. And when we have those, we can kind of age a little more gracefully. And not end up being, necessarily that person that's on 11 billion prescriptions and dealing with tons of health issues over time.
Yeah, you want to be strong, but you don't want to be like out of breath every time you got to go up the stairs, I mean, that's not the way to live for sure. Well, Bryan, what about zone 5? Because it's interesting that you're talking about like zone 2 and zone 5. And I wanted to also ask too, it's like, what about the two in the middle, zone 3 and zone 4? But yeah, what is zone 5 and what's its benefits and importance towards like training, cardio training?
Yeah, so zone 5 is going to be the one that has the biggest impact on improving our V02 max. So not that zone 2, zone 3, zone 4 aren't going to increase VO2 max, but you have to actually be like panting and being really out of breath to get the maximal impact on your VO2 max, which is the most that you can output at any given time, right? And so given what I said earlier about the longevity correlation with VO2 max, that's going to be the one that probably has the biggest impact on that. I do struggle a little bit though with tying zone 5 to daily life, because there's tons of examples in life where you need to be efficient at zone 2 to just, be able to move throughout life without being out of breath, going upstairs for the elevator's broken, stuff like that. But like when you look at the applicability of maximal output, like literally as hard as you can possibly go for 15 seconds to 4 minutes, something along those lines. You just don't see it a lot in daily life unless you're an athlete. So one example that I think of is like, hey, maybe you're at the airport and you have 2 bags that you didn't check, and the long escalator is broken.
And you're doing that between the gate hustle.
Yeah. So like maybe you get into zone 5 there, but like there aren't too many times in life where you have to really go as hard as you possibly can cardiovascularly. So I think the applicability of zone 5 work is less to daily life, and it's more about its impact on longevity through VO2 max as a byproduct of VO2 max. But zone 5 is also super malleable in the way that you can implement it in a number of different ways. So zone 2 is a little more restrictive because you kind of have to find yourself just in the suck for 45 to 60 minutes, just kind of staying there. But with zone 5, you can do it, like I said, in 15-second bursts where you're going as hard as you can for 15 seconds, and then you're like resting for 2 minutes so that you can fully recover and then go as hard as you can again. But at the same time, you could also train zone 5 on one end of the spectrum by doing like 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off. And as long as that 4-minute work period is tapping you out at the end, where the last 30 seconds of that 4 minutes is pushing your limit, and then you finish the 4 minutes and you're like, oh, thank God I have this recovery now because I need it, right? I've earned it. Then that is also zone 5. So there's kind of like a number of different ways we can get into zone 5, but it really just depends on you finishing each interval feeling like you're going to die.
I think it depends too, because it's like it really does depend on like what do you do in your daily life, and then like what do you like doing for your hobbies, because it's like zone 5 is so helpful and beneficial when we're talking about building up power output, and we're talking about building up speed. And then just our ability, it kind of like you were hinting at, ability to recover and stuff like that, in addition to the VO2 max stuff. So it's like, again, if you're somebody that you're like, fuck yeah, I love CrossFit, or you do very explosive sports, well, that zone 5 stuff is going to be super helpful. But it's like equal parts, maybe you're just a mom with kids that, you work a desk job, and then you want to keep up with your kids and have fun with them and do, sports and stuff. But again, it's like, do you probably need to like max output speed? Probably not, unless your kid goes running away or does something stupid. You need to like book it behind them, and you never know. But I think still it comes back to, we also just love being well-rounded in our training, and there's just so many benefits from that too, because it's like, especially from the injury prevention side, it's like, well, if you're never training fast and explosive, I would also think you're probably more at risk to end up getting injured or stuff like that. Because it's like, again, it's not sexy to be like, oh, you'll never get injured, but it is really important. And so I think that's kind of just the big overarching theme for this podcast for sure. Is it's like, maybe even if you don't love cardio and you've always been somebody that you're like the cardio no person, it's like, well, equal parts, usually the stuff we hate the most is also the stuff we need to do the most of, or the stuff that we would benefit the most from. But I did have a lot of fun, especially when I was like writing up stuff for basically we're about to start brand new 6-week hypertrophy and metabolic conditioning cycles. And so I had a lot of fun kind of writing up the stuff for like zone 2 versus zone 5, because zone 5, I think I put like, welcome to the pain cave. Like, it's like there's no need to monitor it, because if you don't think you're dying or, borderline dying, if you're not, again, redlining or borderline redlining, you're probably sandbagging and you're not in zone 5, because zone 5 is like,
it's supposed to hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, make it heavy, make it hurt, make it fast, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the big overarching thing to take with the zone stuff is just kind of having that mental proximity of like, okay, if zone 2 is kind of the 60 to 70%, we know that zone 5 is 90 to 100%, do my efforts match this? And again, Brian's kind of given some metrics of like, we can get super nerdy and we can, monitor heart rate and stuff like that. Or even, it's like, I know on my Concept 2 bike, it's like, okay, if I'm pedaling at this output, it's probably putting me in this heart rate. So just know too, it's like, again, how many fucks you want to give about this is completely up to you. But, we do, especially with the zone 2 stuff, it's like if we can kind of keep it in a certain bubble, that is, where the magic happens, where the sauce happens. Yeah. So it is important, but also like, don't be pedaling on the bike or rower or whatever the entire time, being like, oh my God, it's dropping. It's like, just, try to stay in that consistency.
I think it's probably important to talk about the equipment for each zone too, though, because like when you're staying, your goal is to be in zone 2. You kind of need something that you're relatively efficient at. So if you think about like Alex or myself, who are poor runners, if we try to go out to run, even if we're running slow, we'll probably see our heart rate spike.
Dude, my heart rate jumps up every time I run.
Right.
Alex hates running with me.
I tried running the other day for zone 2, and I had to run an 11-minute mile to keep my heart rate low enough.
Dude, that's what I noticed when I was training for my half marathon. Because when I learned that you, for like distance running, like you definitely want to train like in the zone 2 a little bit like more often.
Yeah.
I had to really run very slowly. And it was a mind fuck, because I was like, I don't want to run a 12-minute mile, but I have to.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's important that unless you're a very efficient runner, running is probably a poor choice for zone 2 for most people, especially males that have a decent amount of muscle mass on them. And then rowing, for the same reason, people are just inefficient at it for the most part. It's usually a pretty poor choice for zone 2 as well. However, if you come from a CrossFit background like myself, I spent an entire year honing my rowing technique because I found it really important. And so I can actually just sit on a rower for like 30 or 40 minutes and just grind right in zone 2 and just stay there consistently over and over, which I can't do on running. So those two equipments, while they may not be ideal for most people, running and rowing can work if you are efficient at them. But the best choices ubiquitously for most people for zone 2 are going to be some sort of bike, preferably one that has arms that move so that you can get your whole body involved in it. Because I know, like from personal experience, and I've talked to many other people, that if I'm on a stationary bike without arms that move, my legs start burning before I can get my heart rate high enough. Mm-hmm. And so that therefore it becomes inefficient for me to do a stationary bike as well, because my legs are producing so much lactate, but my heart rate isn't actually elevated. Laura pointed out that incline walking is a really, really good choice for zone 2. And I agree fully with that. So you kind of do have to spend maybe a session or two and find exactly what the balance is of the speed on the treadmill with your amount of incline on the treadmill, to kind of find that perfect range where your heart rate just stays right in that zone 2. But that's a really good choice. And then an elliptical could be a good choice if you like that hamster wheel thing. And we had a member in the Paragon group recently ask if they could do rucking for zone 2. And rucking just basically means walking with weight. And so, yeah, like walking with weight is going to certainly make your heart rate go higher than walking with no weight. So I also am a huge fan of saying, yeah, like if rucking is something that works for you, then that's a great choice too. But those differ from the preferable equipment for zone 5, because essentially what we want in zone 2 is to choose things that we're efficient at. And we literally want the exact opposite for zone 5. We want things that we're inefficient at, because we want to get that heart rate to spike up and then feel like we're going to die. And then thank God we have a rest coming up before we have to get back to this thing that we're really inefficient at. And so running is probably a really good choice, except in my case, because I have gotten injured twice in the last year. Tore my plantar fascia in June and popped my hamstring a few weeks ago, both times sprinting for zone 5. And so I am no longer, as of literally 3 weeks ago, never going to run again for zone 5. I think I will still run for just general ability to run zone 2. Hopefully one day I can get to do zone 2 running if I become more efficient at it. But my days of sprinting for zone 5 are behind me. And I would just caution anybody that's doing zone 5 work. If you don't generally sprint as part of your usual conditioning program, there definitely is a higher injury risk associated with that because of the impact. So really good things for zone 5 would be running up a hill. I think that can alleviate the burden of injury significantly. If you pick a steep hill and you kind of sprint up that would be really good for zone 5. Airdyne bike is for sure my preferred option for zone 5, because you can get the whole body going. You can put so much power and energy into it. And you just know by the end of each interval that you've given everything you have, and you kind of earn that rest period.
Yeah. If you ever done a 60-second max cal, that is terrible. That is the worst thing possible.
I'm going to beg to differ. I was going to say 10 minutes for max calories on an assault bike. That's the worst fucking thing ever. I was just going to add too, it's funny because I actually, again, as somebody that comes from like a cardio heavy / endurance heavy background, I still find it's like, even if I'm not doing regular cardio, it's like, ultimately, if you're like, yo, you want to go run like 10 miles today, a bit okay. Because I think in my world, it's a lot more mental than it is like physical. And I still feel that way about a lot of cardio stuff too, is it's like, it's a lot of your mindset about like, are you willing to hurt or be uncomfortable, and your okayness with being uncomfortable, over the course of time. But I do think it's important to throw in there. It's like, this is my personal opinion, but like cardio stuff should be fun. So also let it be fun. I think for so many people, it's like, I get so sad that people's perception is like, oh, I have to go do cardio, or like, oh, I have to go stomp along, on a stair step or this or that. And it's like, also just remember, it's like, obviously not in the context of what we're talking about with zone 2 and zone 5 of like, hey, go do these specific things. But it's like, also let cardio be fun. It's like cardio stuff is also snowboarding and skiing and hiking and trail running and mountain biking and stuff. So just, again, I just wanted to tag that on, but also it's like, choose the equipments here for your zone 2 and zone 5 that you enjoy. If there's something that you're like, fuck this thing, fuck the assault bike, well, you're probably gonna, it's like repeatedly doing something you hate is also going to be really miserable. But then equal parts, I will give the opposite side of that. I was somebody that I always hated the assault bike in CrossFit, just because I'm such like a teeny tiny person. And I didn't know how to like have that power output. It wasn't until I actually tore my shoulder and the assault bike was all that I had, that now it's like, if you were like, yo, you want to go on an assault bike? And like, yeah, and so I figured it out. So it's like equal parts too. It's like, try to not let yourself get caught up in this self-internal dialogue also of like, oh, I'm a poor cardio person, so these are my only options. It's like, also, again, it's like, you might fall in love with the skier, or you might fall in love with the assault bike or the rower. So much of it, again, is it's like, well, when you suck at something or you don't know how to correctly do it, once you actually figure it out and once you figure out how to move well, then it's a total game changer and stuff like that. So I just thought that was kind of important to throw in the mix, because again, it's like, it can be really easy to get caught up on these narratives or kind of self-limiting beliefs about things. So also, it's like, for me personally, I'm not going to limit myself on any of the cardio stuff. It's like, the gym does have a ski erg. It does have, it's like I said, I've got my Concept 2 bike. You'll find me rowing. You're going to find me doing all the things because, again, I find A, there's more enjoyment in mixing it up regularly, but B, just keep it fun. Let it be fun. Bryan, question for you. This happened. So this popped up in the Facebook group for Paragon not too long ago. But per usual, it seems like TikTok is still where dreams go to die. So the question from the member was, is there anything magical about 12-3-30 that has been going viral on TikTok? And if you don't know what it is, I'm happy to tell you because I Googled and researched.
Yeah, please tell me. I don't know this.
He said, enlighten me. So the 12-3-30 TikTok craze is that you set the treadmill at 12% incline at 3 miles per hour and you walk for 30 minutes. Every single video is smoking hot chicks with the camera like up the booty hole. But is there anything magical about the 12-3-30? Because I think our response as always was like, listen, if something like gets you moving or like, if you're going from like, I'm not doing any cardio, I'm not getting enough steps, I'm not anything to, hey, this gets you moving, it gets you more steps, then by all means, if you enjoy it, do it, embrace it, get in bed with it. But obviously, smoking hot chicks be like, oh yeah, this is going to snap your waist. Oh yeah, it's going to cause you to lose weight. So if you would like to let the people know, is there anything magical about the 12-3-30?
Yeah, I mean,
use this water as my
So no would be the short answer. The expanded answer would be, well, if you're an elite athlete, is walking at 3 miles per hour with a 12 incline, is that going to challenge you? And if you're a metabolically diseased diabetic, is that going to have the same effect that it is for the elite athlete? And so what we end up coming back to is, hey, there are individual differences and any general prescription is not going to apply to everybody equally. And so like for some people, that might get them into zone 2. Is it going to develop your booty? No, definitely not.
I just want to know where it comes from. Like these people literally choose violence and they're like, this is the answer to all of your problems. And what?
This shit isn't new though. Like people have been walking on inclines for, I don't know how long. Like why is this a new thing? Yeah. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously not. But I'll say like I tried to curate my zone 2 on a treadmill with incline walking. And it was close to that. It was a 13-degree incline and a 3.3 speed. And so I could see for like a 5'6" girl, I could see 12-3 being pretty good numbers to get you into zone 2. But when you look at that and the way TikTok is going to make that seem is that if you do this, you get the small waist, you get the big booty, all these things. No, it's clearly not going to do that. But it may get you into zone 2. So there's
it may get you a lot of followers.
Yeah, exactly. Like maybe that'll improve your life.
I don't know about y'all, but that also just sounds like super boring to me, man. I would
rather shave my head than sit like a gerbil.
I mean, if you like doing it, sure thing. But like I like what Lori was talking about before we took a break. Like you got to make cardio fun. You have to enjoy it because, I mean, otherwise it's going to be torture and you're not going to want to do it.
And we can segue to that because that was something I also wanted to touch on too. Is it's like, and I think I mentioned this actually earlier, but it's like I multitask like a motherfucker when I do cardio. It's like I'll still be, like I said, it's like I know where my heart rate should be. I have a Garmin. I know where I should be, like if I'm looking at calories or watts on the bike erg, but it's like, you best believe you'll catch me like doing some work stuff because I'll literally put my laptop on the top of the bike because on the bike erg, there's no handles. So it's more flat. Same thing, the number of things that I've watched on Netflix, we will cruise. I'll play video games. Again, I played a lot of Final Fantasy on my bike erg lately. So it's like, also just keep that in mind is it's like, because zone 2 is just like, hey, we need to stick here. well, cool. Find ways to multitask. You could read a book. You could get caught up on, some work stuff. Like I said, super easy to watch a movie or play video games or stuff like that too. So again, it's like, what a different outlook though, in terms of if you're like, man, I'm going to go sit at the gym for 45 minutes, headphones in, talk to nobody, sweating, a little heavy and out of breath, and like it's miserable, versus like, oh, well, cool. I like sat and did something I enjoy. It's like if you can find joy in your movement, and that's going to be something that you're going to stick with and then also look forward to also. Bryan, obviously we probably could have started the podcast with this, and that's totally fine. But, previously when we started and founded Paragon Training Methods in 2018, there wasn't a ton of flat out what I would just say cardio. So there wasn't like, hey, sit on a bike for 30 minutes or hey, sit on a rower for 40 minutes. You didn't see that in our programs. And so if you kind of want to get into where Paragon kind of started and then how we've been able to work towards having really versatile programs that do kind of cater to all walks of life, all goals, all needs, I think that would kind of be a really good, dope intro, because I'm sure there's somebody that's like, yo, what the fuck? Like, why are we suddenly doing cardio? And it's like, it's not, we're trying to, pull the rug from under your feet or anything like that. It's like, it takes time to get to a place that we can equal parts also provide the education and all of that with our programs as well.
Yeah, I think to fully answer this question, we kind of need to think about where we were when we started Paragon, and also where most of our members are coming from when we started Paragon. And the answer to both of those questions, yeah, the answer to both of those questions is that we were probably in a slightly hormonally compromised position, as were many of our incoming members, because we were all coming from this super deep CrossFit world where even if we weren't competing in CrossFit like you and I were, many of the members were training like they were trying to compete in CrossFit. And so we created Paragon as a solution to help people find sustainable fitness that's going to produce the physique that they're looking for without creating the dumpster fire that we found ourselves in.
And so it's the overtraining. It's under recovery was really the big picture of that. Because I just want to make sure people aren't like, oh, you're saying CrossFit's bad. Like, hi, we still love CrossFit. Like, CrossFit's great. It's just not personally the modality we're doing. But it's like the biggest thing with CrossFit is there's just this piece that if we're not managing recovery and we're not managing how much we're eating, how much we're training, and then equal parts again, that overall exchange is recovery or under recovery. Well, chronic under recovery is how we end up in that space of, oh, hormones, dumpster fire, physical health, dumpster fire.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like our messaging always was, we have 4-day programs, we have 1 optional day, and then we have 2 non-negotiable rest days, because that was kind of the recipe that helps you heal all of that stuff and also achieve the optimal aesthetics that most people are going for when they kind of come over to our programs. And so in that model, there isn't a ton of room for more cardio, because we're all kind of coming from some version of that hamster wheel. But as we've progressed throughout the years, and we've really found that our members have progressed with us. I mean, 80+% of our members now follow one of our physique programs, not our like kind of functional fitness programs. And so when you look at the fact that these members now, they fully buy in to 4 days a week of lifting or 3 days a week of lifting or whatever it is, and they want to include some yoga, or they want to include a Peloton ride, or they want to go out and ruck with their friends, or like whatever these additional activities are that they want to do, they now have the balance and the understanding to be able to implement these things and not have it create the same hormonal chain of events that was happening 5 years ago. And so I think a lot of the way that our business has progressed in the way that we're programming things, and now with the inclusion of this cardio, has been a direct reflection on the members that we have and the life gains that they've all kind of made along the way as well.
Well, because do you even remember, like, I mean, again, it's like to give backstory on me again, briefly, just when I met Bryan, but it was like, I couldn't even, like, if I would start lifting, your girl would feel like she was going to black out, either during the set, after the set. It was like initially when we just started working one-on-one together, but it's like you tried to program something that was, I think it was like assault bike intervals or something. And I just
Yeah.
straight up had to stop. Like my body just wasn't in the place to receive it. And so it's again, just understanding that, if we're in that state where everything is just a dumpster fire and we're not doing so hot, it's like adding on additional conditioning or stuff that might require a really big output. Well, we're going to need even more food than we already need to try and get our get back to base level where we need to be. But then additionally, we're just tossing more wood in the fire. And again, it's like that goal of kind of remedying our recovery and how much we're eating, how much we're training and all that stuff. It's just a lot harder to manage because it's the same thing. It's like it's like, if you're going to like train for a marathon and mutually chase weight loss, there's so many better ways to get to weight loss that aren't that difficult, right? And so same thing, it's like it's just cool that again over time it was like, well, we started with one program, and then as you mentioned, here we are in 2023 and we have 9 different programs, and we do have programs that are more specific to specific goals. Like it's just cool because that's like we've truly looked at what do people love doing, and then how do we provide a smart and sustainable and fun way for them to get from A to B, which is something like truly I'm just so proud of. And so especially as we kind of move into these next couple training cycles, I'm just so stoked about everything.
Yeah, I think it's important to also look at the research on concurrent training and where it was 5 years ago when we started the company and then where it is now, because we are an evidence-based company. And so we do follow the research. And back in 2017, 2018, the majority of the research was saying that, hey, if you do concurrent training, meaning if you're trying to do cardio and you're trying to lift weights, or you're trying to play a sport and do something else, like if you're combining 2 different things together, you're going to decrease the effect of each one. Now the research more leans to the fact of, hey, these 2 things can be complementary and they can help each other, but we just have to do it in a very intelligent way, program it properly, and understand that one of the 2 things is the priority and the other one takes a slight back seat. So we're not necessarily trying to get equal adaptations to both at the same time, but they can work alongside each other effectively.
I think Jason Phillips is somebody that he used to talk about this a lot, but it's like looking at there's kind of a triangle out there in terms of different things we can chase. And so it's like, well, we can chase aesthetics, we can chase performance, and then we can chase health. And so very similar, it's like, well, what's most important to you / where do you want to lean the most? And, for most people, those goals change over time. So again, it's like, even when I met Bryan, I was still deep in the sauce of like, oh, I still need to be able to XYZ in the gym. I need to be able to hit these certain numbers. And then, ironically, 5 years later, I'm the person that I never thought I would be of like, oh, actually, if I don't PR ever again, I'm over it. Like, I just don't want to feel like shit anymore. I don't want my joints to hurt, which is really cool. And again, that also ebbs and flows. It's like equal parts, obviously, when I was training for the half marathon last year, we were doing the most. It was like we were strength training 3 or 4 times a week. We were still running multiple times a week. And, it was this delicate balance of like, the second we got done with that race, it was like, man, I'm so stoked to do less and like feel a little bit better. So I think that's the cool part too, is just understanding it's cool if those goals kind of, ebb and flow over time, because they are going to as a person.
So Bryan, you mentioned some of the research done on concurrent training, how it's changed over the years, and Paragon being more of an evidence-based training program. How are you implementing these new ideas into the current training that's being offered?
Yeah, so this next cycle that we're jumping into starting on February 27th is kind of like a hypertrophy metabolic mix. And so this is a great way to follow a strength cycle, which is what we just finished up. And if you go back and listen to the first podcast we did together, episode 2, it was strength versus hypertrophy and kind of the programming variables that go into each. And one of the kind of important aspects of strength is that, hey, rep ranges are lower, rest periods are longer. And essentially what ends up happening when you train that way is you lose a little bit of conditioning. But you do that for the purpose of improving your strength. So it's kind of like an opportunity cost. Now we're looking at this metabolic cycle, or hypertrophy metabolic, kind of like a slash metabolic. And basically the idea is that we want to now increase our ability to increase our aerobic base, essentially, so that we don't have to rest as long between sets. We can do slightly higher reps and not get completely out of breath. We can facilitate better recovery between sessions, all of these aspects. And so there's a couple ways that you can go about doing that. In prior years, when we've had metabolic cycles, we've leveraged weightlifting circuits, sort of like giant sets and supersets and things like that, to get our heart rate elevated by using weights as the tool.
AKA less rest time, more soul.
Yeah, like higher rep ranges and less rest time.
Correct. Yeah.
Weights,
so like
right?
in the past, I remember we'd had a circuit that was basically a full body circuit because it was meant to create systemic adaptations to cardiovascular system. And so it was like 3 big movements that cover the entire body. I think it was like a squat, overhead press, and a bent over row. And so you kind of went through this circuit where you would do those 3 really quickly back to back, and then you would take a rest, you would recover, and you'd do it again. And this slayed people. Like, people would just get smashed by it.
Well, because if you didn't pick your weight right, like, you fucked.
If you didn't pick your weight right, or I mean, if especially coming off of a strength cycle, you're doing heavy weights, and then you jump into this like high volume, low rest. Yeah.
So this time around,
people not eating also like is a big one.
Right. So food's obviously an important factor. Yeah. But this time around, we're taking a bit of a different approach. And so we're using some of these zone 2 and zone 5 cardio systems to help train that energy system in our body instead of having to rely on using weights as cardio. And so now we're kind of separating these things out a little bit. And, Lori and I have talked about at length how the research seems to show that for zone 2, we want to be 45 to 60 minutes. And in the future, we will have that as an option within our programs. But this time around, for our 6-week hypertrophy metabolic cycle, we're going to focus more on 15 to 20 minutes for most of the cardio stuff. And this is really for 2 reasons. One, because we want you guys to be able to feel like you can complete the workout without feeling like you now have to do a 45-minute weight session and a 45-minute cardio session. But if we have a 45-minute weight session and then we tack on 20 minutes of zone 2 at the end, that seems much more reasonable and much more manageable and can begin to facilitate some of these metabolic adaptations that we want. Like, if we're going from strength training where there's no cardio and then we're adding 20 minutes of cardio, that's already a huge increase. And so there are going to be a ton of adaptations that are going to occur within your body just from implementing these 20-minute bouts. And then in future cycles, we're going to have, like I said, the opportunity to add in longer 45 to 60-minute zone 2 and kind of more thoroughly programmed zone 5 sessions. But in this cycle specifically, we're doing some same muscle group supersets. This is actually one of my favorite ways to implement metabolic work, because you could either do a 15 to 20 rep set, but based on the effective reps model, which has some flaws, but I think it's mostly positive. The effective reps model essentially states that the final 5 reps before failure are the most effective reps. And so if we're using that model and you have a set of 20 reps, you're essentially going to have to do 15 reps that are, quote, ineffective, just to get to the final 5 reps that are effective. So that's very time consuming. It's very energy dense. However, my favorite way of doing this is same muscle group supersets. So instead of having to do a set of 20 lateral raises with 15 ineffective lateral raises, essentially, you can do a set of 10 lateral raises, and then you can immediately move to a set of shoulder press for 10 reps. And now we've essentially put our delts under tension for 20 reps, but we've done this with 2 failure points instead of 1 failure point. So there's a lot fewer wasted reps and a much more effective stimulus to the muscles and more time efficient as well.
Well, it's also just more like foolproof. Like, again, like, most people don't know their 1 rep maxes, equal parts. People really struggle if they're newer to training with understanding, like RPE or reps from failure. So it's like, it's almost just a more foolproof way to get someone from A to B without necessarily getting the sidetrack of like, oh, did they pick the right way? Did they XYZ? So it's like, I think that's kind of dope too, is it's like anything that's a little more foolproof of just getting people, the stimulus we're trying to achieve. Like,
what about zone 5 training? Is there going to be zone 5 training in the new cycles?
Yeah. So the 4D physique program, which is 4 training days, and then 1 kind of Saturday optional day. What we're going to do with that program is put the zone 2 sessions at the end of training, like I discussed before, 45 minutes or so of weightlifting, and then a 20-minute zone 2 session. And then Saturday is going to be reserved for zone 5. And so, like I kind of said earlier, there's a number of different ways you can get into zone 5, everything from 15 seconds all out to like 4 minutes of repeats. And so Saturdays are going to be dedicated to zone 5 work. It's going to look a little bit different across some of the other programs. So like our 3-day physique program, it doesn't have a Saturday conditioning workout. So in that program, there's 1 zone 2 session and 1 zone 5 session that are programmed at the end of the weightlifting days. Of course, if you're a 3D physique member and you want to add a 4th day to do the second zone 2 session, or you want to move that zone 5 session to Saturday and then do your zone 2 sessions on your weightlifting days, that's totally cool too. I don't think there's necessarily a good or bad way of going about that. It's really like, hey, we created a 3-day program. We don't want to tell you have to train 4 days. But if you want to, obviously you can. And then for our cardio lift program, that's also a 3 lifting days program, but it has 2 specific cardio days added. And so those days, we're actually going to use more of the evidence-based approach to zone 2. So because we have an entire day dedicated to cardio, I am kind of progressively increasing the cardio dose over time, where we're starting at like 20 minutes, then 30, then 40. And by the end of the cycle, we'll be getting up to like that 45 to 60 minute range for zone 2, which makes sense because it's its own dedicated day. Like if you're going to go to the gym, you don't want to just go and do 20 minutes and turn around and go home. So I think for that program, I mean, it is a cardio lift program, like cardio's in the name. So I think it kind of makes sense there.
I love that you're doing this though, Bryan, because like what came to mind is it's like, can you imagine if we really did go from a strength cycle and all the low reps, and heavier weights and stuff like that. And then we're just like, hey, so go do like 45 minutes of cardio. Like literally it would be the equivalent ask of being like, hey, so I know you're not running right now, but I need you to go do a time trial for a 5K, aka 3.1 mile. And people would be like, wait, what? So I think that's why this cycle is so cool, is it really is like a step up to like the next cycle after this is going to be super dope. Because again, it's like, ultimately we're going to have options for everybody, where if you're just like, listen, I'm just here to lift and do the thing. Awesome. But then mutually, it's like, again, this is actually what I do with my training present day is I hit, all 4 physique days. And then I'm also doing 2 to 3 days of either, stuff on the bike or go for a trail run. So I think again, it's like this cycle I'm excited about. The next cycle after that, I'm really excited about. And then mutually, I'm also still excited about the post that I made. For those that missed it, one of the little titles said, "You're getting your sexy and your engine back." And I was like, damn, somebody give this girl a raise. Like she on fire for marketing. So I'm really excited about, this cycle. And I think especially as people get into week 1, it's like, if there's hesitation about like, ooh, I don't know. Like, I think just from seeing the programming and the previews, like I'm super stoked about it.
Yeah, what I was going to ask is, so it sounds like zone 2 training is the predominant, like you want to do more of zone 2 training than zone 5. Is that correct?
Yeah, generally for all of the adaptations that we're looking for, whether they're cardiovascular or health span and longevity, or just like, daily life enhancement, we probably want to spend about 70 to 80% of our cardio time in zone 2. And then, maybe 10% or so of that time in zone 5. And then that leaves us 10 or 20% that I'm sure you could do more zone 2, you could do a little more zone 5, or you could kind of sprinkle in some zone 3 and 4. And then on top of that, like we still encourage people to walk and get their steps in and do their zone 1. It's just zone 1 is kind of just part of daily life. So I
It's
don't
your
know
vegetables,
that needs,
man.
yeah, just do it. Just do your zone one. Like, don't think about it.
Eat your vegetables. Do your zone one.
I think we just kind of wanted to like bam bam on some common questions or things we get into, if that's cool with everybody.
Yep.
Alex, you get the first one. I'll get the second one.
Cardio for weight loss.
Is it necessary?
So I mean, we've talked about this to end's length here, between us at least, but I'm much more of a fan of using cardio at maintenance or maintenance plus, where you have the food and the fuel for recovery. And so I very much prefer not to include cardio, at least initially, inside weight loss programs, because you only have so many tools that you can use when you're trying to lose weight. And you want to save cardio as a tool that you can pull from the toolbox when some of the other tools that we have available have kind of stopped working, right? Like you've cut calories, you've maybe increased steps. And at that point, maybe cardio becomes a tool that you can use. But cardio is a very inefficient tool. Poncer and crew have done a number of studies on energy compensation and have basically found that if you're at maintenance or maintenance plus, you sort of get credit for all the calories that you think you're burning. Meaning if you go out for a run and you think you burn 400 calories, like, hey, you burn 400 calories. But they've also shown that if you are doing cardio in a deficit, your body actually is going to compensate a lot of that energy that you think you're burning. So you could think you're burning 400 calories, but you're actually burning 250. And so now you have this problem in diagnostics, and it becomes very difficult to kind of assess how much energy you exerted and therefore how much energy you need to take in.
When we're approaching weight loss, we still ultimately have to be in a calorie deficit to create that outcome. And so we're a big advocate for, obviously, it's like if you love running and you're already running, keep running, keep doing the thing. But it's like if we're talking very broadly and generically, it's like track your macros, get into a calorie deficit that might be as little as 10%, as much as, 30 or 35% below your maintenance calories. But can we create that calorie deficit? And then as dieting goes on, can we use cardio or can we use something like steps as a tool that we're starting to add in additional activities so that we don't have to keep dropping our food? So let's say that, we start at a 10% deficit, we drop down to a 15% deficit over time, then maybe we're hitting 20, 25. Well, that's when we're starting to be like, hey, well, rather than going even lower on food to keep weight loss going, well, can we add in more activity? Can we add in, again, more steps or some type of productive cardio? So again, just using it as a tool rather than, for so many people, the way it's wired is like, I'm going to lose weight. Okay, I'm going to start doing cardio. I'm going to change 11 billion things. And it's like, man, like keep it simple, keep it easy. Start by dialing in your nutrition, adjusting there, and then we can add in more sexy, more variables, more stuff over time.
I agree fully with that. Yeah.
Second question we had, does cardio on an empty stomach burn more fat? AKA, should we, there's always this question of like, should we be fasted and do we need to do fasted cardio? Is it more beneficial? Or can we eat food and be fed when we go to do our cardio?
Yeah. So I think for zone 2, you kind of have the freedom of doing either one. I personally like it fasted, and this may be a more male perspective, and I think that you may have a different opinion as it comes to females. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah. So because the purpose of zone 2 is mostly to stay within the fat burning zone, we shouldn't need to have carbohydrates in our body to effectively zone 2. The alternative to is zone 5, in which case you're 100% not using fat in zone 5. And so I would absolutely not go into a zone 5 session without having some sort of fuel in you, similarly to going into a weightlifting session.
Alex, what would be your answer? Like if a client asked you like, hey, if I'm doing cardio, should I be doing it fasted or fed? Like, how would you explain that to clients? Or like, what would be your response?
I mean, I think it really just depends on the person. I think I agree with Bryan. Like for zone 2, you probably don't need to have fuel if that's something that just doesn't sit well with you. Like I know for me personally, I I don't need to necessarily have food before I go and do some kind of, longer steady state cardio. But if I'm doing
This
something
is
like jiu-jitsu,
blowing my mind. I would literally die. I would skydive off a cliff.
If I'm doing jiu-jitsu, I normally would eat, but I have definitely trained jiu-jitsu even without eating. So I think it really just depends on how you respond to it and how you do with it. I'm not sure exactly. I don't think from the evidence space, like there's any difference between fasted or fed.
So the one thing that I did actually mean to say is that it appears that if you do cardio fasted, that you burn more fat during the session, but that there's a compensation post-session where your metabolism slows down as a result of that, whereas your metabolism stays higher if you have food going into that session.
So to recap, Bryan, because like I said, it's like I was under the assumption it's like just do whatever makes you happy. Like if you enjoy doing, if you enjoy or prefer being fasted, be fasted. But then reversely, if you do enjoy having food in your stomach, by all means do it too. Either way, I would still peg that as like a 1% thing of like there's so many bigger rocks out there to like give a fuck about with your nutrition fitness. Especially with especially with females, it's like just keep in mind that again, it's like because we have menstrual cycles and things are just a little more complex. Our body is just much more sensitive when we start to look at changes in terms of doing, just in general, like not even in relation to, specifically like doing cardio, but it's like even when we look at comparing males versus comparing menstruating women to, fasting protocols or this or that, it's just like you start to see a lot of variance. And so I would just, especially, if you are female, if you are menstruating, I would just, really play around with this and figure out where you feel best. What you'll likely see is that, especially as we get older, we start having changes to estrogen levels once we kind of hit that 40, 50 and beyond versus, when we're kind of earlier in our 20s and 30s, it's like you're likely going to feel a little bit better doing some of the fasting stuff or not being as fed if you're a little bit older versus again, it's like if you're trying to maintain your menstrual cycle and your menstrual health, it's like for me personally, like I said, it's like that is a no-brainer. And I quickly learned like absolutely fucking not. Like if I'm going to the gym, I don't like training fasted. I like being fed. But it also like part of that too is just like a digestive preference. It's like for years, I trained for a marathon. So it's like, well, yeah, I'm going out for 3 hours. So heck yeah, I need to go slam food or I'm going to die halfway through the run, right? So it's like equal parts. What can your digestion handle? But then truly, how do you feel, if you have food in your stomach, do you feel sluggish? Do you feel just, you're not performing your best, whether that's cardio, whether that's lifting or reversely, do you feel, even for me, it's like, I would just want something, like I said, a little bit of protein, a little bit of carb in my stomach for sure.
Yeah. Individual preference and self-monitoring, I think is the takeaway from that.
Next question. Should I do cardio before or after my weight training? So I kind of, when I was typing this up, because we like brainstormed a couple questions, I was like, man, there's so many variables. So I'm going to go deeper so your answer can be easier to answer. So if we're just talking during a session, if you have 20 minutes of cardio to do and you have, say, 40 minutes of weight training, would you do the cardio at the beginning or at the end of the workout?
Yeah, I think it makes most sense to do it at the end. If you're doing it at the beginning, you're using a lot of the fuel and the energy, mental focus, like all three of those things that you probably need to get the most out of your weight training session. And so doing it afterward is actually, especially for zone 2, is going to allow your body to be in a state where it can utilize more fat for fuel, which is kind of the goal in zone 2. Because the weightlifting is going to use all of the glucose and the carbohydrates in your body. So then when you get to the zone 2 work after weight training, you just will predominantly be using fat because there just isn't carbohydrate available at that point. Zone 5, zone 5 is really the same energy fuel utilization as weightlifting. So I definitely would not do it first because then your weightlifting session is really, really going to suffer. But
can
even
you imagine
more so,
redlining and then trying to go lift? Holy shit.
I know. But like, even if you do zone 5 afterwards, like if you're going to do zone 5 after weightlifting, you probably need to take a 20-minute break and down some carbohydrate and a little bit of protein or something like that. because you're just not going to have any energy substrates available after lifting if you try to go directly into zone 5.
Is that why you're putting on a separate day? Like on that Saturday? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody's like, yo, I can go to the gym multiple times, or I can split up their sessions. We've already gotten this question a lot of, hey, is it okay to split up your training sessions, or is that actually preferred? Like, does science kind of suggest or encourage, hey, if you can split up these sessions, or, it's like, is there any additional benefit? Or again, at the end of the day, it's like, just get it done is the most important thing. But is there any additional benefit if we do split up those training sessions?
I think there's 100% good rationale to split up the zone 5 and the weightlifting into separate sessions. I think there is also good rationale for zone 2 for many of the same reasons, but I think it's less so. Just because weightlifting does use glucose and carbohydrate as fuel, and zone 2 is meant to use fat as fuel. They're different energy systems. So I think the overlap is going to be less significant there. But I still think in a perfect world, if you have all day, I would do one of them as far apart from the other. Just because if nothing, for no other reason, the mental focus and the energy that you have to put into that session.
And then lastly, if you have the choice, because I also wanted to offer this like as a question also just for somebody that maybe they're not necessarily following our programs, but would still find value in it. If you're going to do a cardio / like zone 2 session with your weight training, do you prefer to see that paired with upper body days, or do you prefer to see that paired with lower body days?
Yeah, I think any of these cardio sessions should probably be paired with upper body days if possible. But if you're doing them as separate sessions, say 9 hours apart, like one of them's in the morning and one of them's in the evening, and you have a couple meals in between, I think the impact is significantly less. I also just don't see zone 2 from my experience over the last number of months doing it. I just don't really see much of a residual impact from zone 2 on my weightlifting. Whereas zone 5, I absolutely
fed would be the hashtag, right? Like assuming you're fed and you're adequately eating enough calories and carbs. Because that's actually something I'm interested to see is, do our members, like if they kind of know what their maintenance calories are while just exclusively strength training and bodybuilding, do they actually have to bump up their carbs? Do they actually have to bump up their calories? And what does that look like? I'm like very emotionally invested to see what that change ends up being.
I mean, anytime that you're increasing your energy expenditure, you need to then subsequently increase your energy intake. And so yeah, if you're doing cardio and you weren't doing cardio before, then now you need to eat more food, or you're going to be in a deficit, or a larger deficit than you were before. I also think, to your point, like a really to really good to bring that up, is that if you are just in a deficit and you're trying to lose weight in general, you just have less recovery resources available at all. And so, yeah, I think at that point you need to take in more consideration into where your cardio is in relation to your weights, and making sure you're well fed before each session.
For actual running shoes, what is everybody's favorite brand? And then just kind of talking about, it's like most people don't realize that we can't just like buy a shoe that looks really aesthetic, or like you wouldn't want to just like whatever shoe my favorite person on Instagram. It's like there's actually a lot that goes into running shoes. So
uglier the running shoe, like the more dad look it has, probably the better the running shoe that it is. Like the Nikes look dope, but they're terrible.
Trash.
Like they're so bad.
I feel that way though about ultras, because everybody is a diehard like, yo, ultras, like the Lone Peaks. And I'm like, listen, as a Libra, I want to be about it, but these are uglier than sin. Like, who is doing this? Hire a Nike person to come. Like the shoes, it isn't the shoe that's ugly.
You can't make a pretty shoe that's running that's also good. It's not possible. It's gotta be ugly.
They need a Libra in their shoe gang. That's what I got. Brian, what is your favorite running shoe brand?
So I just switched from Reebok Nanos, which I was just always worn since the CrossFit days.
No wonder you tore your shit.
So I just switched from Reebok Nanos maybe 2 months ago to Zero Minimalist shoes, and that's Zero XERO. And I love them. So Shantae, our friend Shantae, the movement maestro, As soon as she saw me using them, she hit me up and was like, dude, this is going to be really good for you, but you need to take it slow. And so that was really good advice because, my nature is to be like, fuck it, new shoes. Let's see how they go. Let's try them out,
New shoes, new me.
Yeah. So I did make that switch. And then thanks to her caution, I did initially start with walking, and then I started jogging, and then I did pop my hamstring in them as well. But I don't blame the shoe for what happened to my hamstring. I think it was literally a fact of me being 40 years old and sprinting as hard as I possibly can.
I mean, maybe it's because you didn't go full send to have like the finger toe. Was that like the Vibrams?
Yeah, the
like
Vibrams.
That's 2010.
How to not get laid starter pack? Yes.
Yes.
But Alex. I love them. The 01s are great.
Alex, what you rocking?
Well, yeah, the shoes I used to train for my half marathon, I used Mizuno's. I actually got fitted for those. So if you buy running shoes, I would suggest getting fitted. That was super helpful. I went to a Fleet Feet here in Austin, but I think that's a big chain. But they basically just take a look at the shape of your foot, and then they even actually got me some insoles that also help too, because I think I had some arches that were a little bit flat. But I would suggest getting fitted and making sure that you have a shoe. And also sizing is really important. That's also too what they'll figure out too, is because if you're running like really long distances, your foot actually swells up. And so I normally wear like a 9.5, and they gave me a 10. So, and that worked really, really well. Cause I was noticing, I had a pair of other shoes like Brooks, that I just kind of bought randomly online, and I bought them at size. And yeah, I mean, once I started getting the high mileage, like I started getting, like my foot started going numb because it would swell up.
Totally. Well, it's like I did shoe fitting at, I think the place I went here was Roadrunner Sports, but they went like balls out on like, you like would walk on a treadmill, you ran on a treadmill, you'd stand on a special scale. And then that was when I found out like, oh, sick. I have like one super flat foot and then like one arch, which is for sure like really from common, gymnastics.
Actually. Yeah.
But it's like they're gonna then basically tell you, okay, your best fit for a neutral shoe, your best fit for more of like a super cushioned shoe. And you also like try on all of them so you see like what feels good for your foot. But yeah, like as hard as it is, try not to just buy based off of like color and what it looks like. But popular brands you're often going to see would be like Ultras, Mizuno, Brooks, New Balance.
The on running, that's really popular now. Yeah, the on running.
One question we get a lot, Bryan, is kind of this idea, and again, it's kind of like a mental process where people are like, hey, I want to lose weight, so I think I'm going to sign up for a half marathon or I'm going to sign up for a marathon. And so I see where the thought process is going, because it's like, hey, like, how can I sign up for something that's going to give me a lot of activity and really get me moving? But I think that equal parts, we end up with kind of a tough dichotomy there of mixed goals, because it's like, well, we're chasing this performance thing while mutually chasing this aesthetic thing. And again, it's like, it's not like, oh, hey, I'm going to go run 3 miles. It's like, yo, I'm going to go run for several hours. So if you want to just briefly talk, like basically the question would be, is marathon training a great way to lose weight?
Yeah, I mean, it probably will make you lose weight just because you're going to be doing so much activity, but that doesn't mean that it's a good idea to do that. The best idea would be you sign up for a marathon and then you increase the amount of food that you're eating to support the training that you're doing for the marathon, in which case you don't lose weight. But obviously there's like some serious kind of downstream effects of losing weight due to increased activity like that, such as catabolism. So, you are going to lose a much higher percentage of muscle mass when you take that approach than you would if you were dieting strictly by reducing calories and a moderate level of physical activity. And then you'll also notice through that catabolic effect, you'll notice some negative impacts on your weight training specifically. So as your body loses muscle, you'll notice that you can no longer lift the same weights that you were lifting before. And I mean, you actually experienced this when you were training for your half marathon, Lori, and you weren't even in a calorie deficit per se. You were just running a lot And even with sufficient food supply, you still noticed that you couldn't lift the type of weights you were lifting before in the gym. So imagine if you were doing that with a calorie deficit.
Dude. Well, and it was wild too, because it's like, the thing is, I never felt like shit in the gym. Like, I felt good and I felt strong, but I wasn't physically performing strong, if that makes sense. So it's like, it literally was when Laura came out to visit and I was like, oh, what weight are you using? It was like, we had some like hip thrust, glute. It was like the hip thrust cast glute bridge combo or something like that. And I'm a really strong hip thruster. Like, it's literally sumo deadlift and hip thrust are like my two best lifts. And like whatever weight she was using, I was literally using like half of it. And I was like, what? But it was like once we stopped doing all the running, it was like we ran the marathon probably about a month after just getting back to basically solely, hypertrophy training. And it was like all my lifts were like, woo. So like I said, it was very interesting because we talk about that phenomenon all the time. But like I said, it's like personally, I always felt high energy in the gym. I felt really, really strong. I just wasn't moving the same weights that I could when I was just exclusive, just strength training and bodybuilding.
Bro, I gained 15 pounds training for a half marathon. I gained weight.
So talk about that though, Alex, because it's like the thing is, like, bodybuilding and strength training doesn't make me hungry. Like, it's, I have normal hunger response. Like, oh, I just got back from the gym. I haven't eaten in a while. Yeah, I'm hungry. But it's like when I go run, I'm freaking hungry. So was part of that also just like, I know you intentionally did a calorie surplus with that, but was part of that also just driven by like, dude, I'm freaking hungry and I need to eat until, I obviously feel satiated.
I was in the thick boy running club for sure, man. Like
thickness.
So, I purposely went into a surplus because I knew that I was doing all this training and I knew I needed to fuel for that. So, I actually felt better and my runs got better and a lot of people were like, don't you want to lose some weight so you can run faster? I actually started running faster when I started to eat more food and go into a surplus. So, I'm sure some of that was also adaptation, but again, my performance got better as I started to increase food.
Like no joint pain, none of that stuff.
No, I actually recovered like a fucking boss. So,
nice.
And I was doing jiu-jitsu on top of that too, man. Like I'm telling you, I was doing all the fucking things. And this is the thing. Like I was eating like 4,000 calories a day almost. So,
here's what I would tack onto that just as a guess, because it's like, I think that wherever your body's preferred performance set point is, you were probably lower than that. And so when you gained weight, you probably got up there, because it's like, reversely, I can attest to the opposite. That I remember when our friend Bethany came out to visit, and it was when I was still kind of in the midst of like struggling with my hormones, trying to just get, my nutrition, my fitness, my everything in check. And it was like, I was probably 10 pounds heavier than I am now. And it's like my body weight where I'm at now is so effortless to maintain. Like I perform well, I feel good. It checks literally all the box from like, I like how I look to I like how I perform. And I feel I have the trifecta. I feel strong, I feel great, sleep great, menstrual cycle, all that stuff is great. But it definitely, when I used to go for a run and I was, 5 pounds heavier, 10 pounds heavier. And again, I'll give the disclaimer that's like the smaller we are, the bigger that body percent change is, even if it's just 5 pounds or 10 pounds versus somebody that's a little bit somebody like Bryan that weighs that 185 to 200. Well, him gaining 5 pounds isn't as big of a deal as like 5 pounds on 115 120 pounds. But I remember it was like when I got down to like 120, this 115 bubble, it's like I said, it's like night and day, because I was experiencing what Bryan was talking about of just like, holy shit, man. Like I feel like an elephant of just like my joints hurt, my body aches, things are not grooving. Whereas again, now, you've gone running with me. Like you used to call me like, Lori Christine Bolt of
White
like, we can go. Well, guys, I think this was a super awesome conversation. I'm super stoked about all of these. This new cycle is going to be super lit. We've got a 6-week cycle. It'll be hypertrophy and metabolic conditioning. Basically, we'll be beginning on February 27th. So we'll release this episode next week. So it should be right on time. But seriously, like, we are so jazzed about these cycles. We think y'all are going to love it. And I think especially if you're somebody listening to this, that you're like, ooh, it is warmer temperatures will be on the horizon. Vacations are coming, spring sports are coming. It's like, this would be a really good segue to, hey, I can start easing into doing some conditioning. I can ease into, again, it's like, we freaking love hypertrophy. Like, I'm bought in. I would buy stock shares at this point. Like, let's go, baby. I'm super into it because hypertrophy training really is. It's just going to help you look and feel your best. So, Bryan, tell the people where they can find you, where they can follow along for your adventures and all that good stuff.
Yeah, at Bryan Boorstein on Instagram. I mostly post on my story. I do not post on the main feed much. So if you go there, you'll see not a whole lot, but check my story out. I post a lot there. And then I have a podcast as well, Eat, Train, Prosper. And we kind of go into the weeds and deep dive into a lot of hypertrophy, strength, and metabolic stuff like this. So if you guys enjoyed this, definitely check that out.
Bryan, I want to see you on TikTok dancing one day, bro.
I don't have that TikTok even downloaded. I can't do it.
I want to see it.